Hey Nomads, welcome to another episode of Travel, Nursing, and Allied Life. I am one of your hosts, Dr. Dylan Callier. Might recognize me from the New Medical Nomads podcast. And today, continuing on the conversation of where is the safest and most dangerous states to go to as a traveler. Previously on cities, we had talked about kind of the data involved with one, it being the most recent data that you can get from the FBI is 2022. And two, it's not very easily accessible or readable in order to get a lot of these answers. So we're going through some different third parties and kind of trying to find some better answers for us. And using that same YouTube channel that we used before, World by Briggs, he did a episode on all 50 states and where they ranked. So we're going to be looking at the top 10 safest when looking at violent crimes, as well as the top 10 most dangerous or most violent states. This seems to be a lot more, seems to be more straightforward than the cities data that we've had. So this, I think, will be much more helpful for us as travelers, especially when it comes to the safest states. National average for violent crime rates in the U.S. is 369.8 per 100,000 residents, or around 370 violent crime incidents per 100,000 residents. So that will be kind of what we're comparing it to when we look at most safe and most dangerous states. We'll start with the top 10 most safe. We'll start with the top 10 safest, and then we will end with the top 10 most dangerous or most violent. So number one safest for all the states is Maine. Maine has a violent crime rate of around 109 per 100,000 residents and is 70.6% less than the national average. So I'm doing less and more on this. So if I say 70.6% less, it's actually around like 30% of the national average. But when we get into the more dangerous more dangerous states, it's a little more easy to understand this. So I'm saying less versus more. Number two on this list, most safe. You're going to notice a trend for these top 7 positions is New Hampshire. New Hampshire's violent crime rate is 146 per 100,000 residents and around 60% less than the national average. Number 3 is Vermont. Vermont's violent crime rate is 173 violent crime per 100,000 residents and is around 53% less than the national average. Number 4 is Connecticut. Violent crime rates is a 182 per 100,000 residents and is 51% less than the national average. Something to consider or to think about, these are the rates. So we're looking at statistics per 100,000 residents versus the overall number. So states with more population are going to have more violent crime, or most likely probability is the more people you have, more incidents that will likely occur. But when we look at per 100,000, it changes it. So Connecticut, their total number is actually the largest out of the ones that we've talked about so far. But the percentage or the statistic of per 100,000 residents is still really, really good. New Jersey is next at number 5. New Jersey's violent crime rate is 195 per 100,000 residents, which is 47% less. I don't know why I think it's, I was just surprised to see New Jersey on the top 10 here. I guess I just always hear about, and I got a lot of, quite a few New Jersey friends, so I can poke fun at them a little bit. I've always heard New Jersey people are just like really rude. And so I don't know. I just assumed it was a rougher state, but apparently it's very safe. They might be rude, but they're not going to punch you. And looking at number 6 on this list is Virginia. Virginia's violent crime rate is 208 per 100,000 residents and 44% less than the national average. And then number 7, Rhode Island, or for their numbers, basically Providence, violent crime rates are 230 per 100,000 residents and is about 38% less than the national average. Not quite what's going on in the Northeast, if it's just too cold up there to be fighting with your neighbors. But yeah, New England's doing really well, for this list at least. Number 8, finally getting away from the Northeast corner, looking at Wyoming. Wyoming with a violent crime rate of 234 per 100,000 residents, and is 37% less than the national average. Number 9 is Idaho. Violent crime rate is 242 per 100,000 residents and is 34% less than the national average. And then finally, number 10 for the top safest. Again, one that I wasn't quite expecting, but I'm not sure why. Hawaii. Hawaii's violent crime rate is 254 per 100,000 residents, or 31% less than the national average. Now getting into the top 10 most dangerous, or top 10 most violent, more accurately. If looking at most dangerous, they start including things like deaths on highway, vehicle collisions, different things like that for their data. But we're specifically looking at violent crime. And there's going to be kind of like a little extra at the end here that we'll talk about. But number 10, most dangerous state in the U.S. is Michigan. Michigan has 478 per 100,000 residents, or is 29% more than the national average. And if you've listened to the cities episode, what you'll notice, now getting into the states, like I think St. Louis had a little over 400%, or at 400% more than the national average, versus like these states, because the states are bigger and their numbers are bigger. As the population grows, you're not going to have as many wild one-offs. So a lot of these are going to be within double digits. Although towards the end, we do get more into like 100% more or 127% more that we'll see at number 1. But just to keep in mind that statistics, the bigger the population, the closer to the mean that you'll get. So you won't have that like 400% more, 300% more on these lists when looking at the states, because they're bigger. And number 9, most dangerous state in the U.S. is South Dakota. Violent crime rate is 501 per 100,000 residents and 36% more than the national average. Number 8 on the list is South Carolina. Violent crime rate is 530 per 100,000 residents, or is 44% more than the national average. Number 7, my home state, Missouri, is violent crime rate of 542 per 100,000 residents, or 47% more than the national average. And number 6 is Louisiana. Violent crime rate is 639 per 100,000 residents, or 73% more than the national average. When we did the cities episode, I was actually surprised to not see some of the Louisiana cities on that list. Again, some of my thinking is some of it was excluded because maybe they were too small, because there was a lot smaller cities on the safe ones or on the safe list. The cities were much smaller. They ranged between like 150,000 to 300,000 residents. And then the top 10 most dangerous tended to be bigger. So that's my take on probably what happened with that data, is that there was a cutoff somewhere for that most dangerous list. But Louisiana, number 6 on the most dangerous list. Number 5 is Arizona, which I was surprised to see. Violent crime rate is 655 per 100,000 residents and is 77% more than the national average. Number 4 on the list is Arkansas. Violent crime rate is 672 per 100,000 residents, or 82% more than the national average. And Tennessee, it was pretty funny watching the video. I was like, thanks, Memphis, because Memphis is pretty up there for violent cities. Their violent crime rate is 673 per 100,000 residents, or 82% more than the national average. Number 2 on the list is New Mexico. New Mexico's violent crime rate is 778 per 100,000 residents, or 110% more than the national average. So we've officially broken into that triple-digit mark for the percentages. And then the number 1 most dangerous state is Alaska. Their violent crime rate is 838 per 100,000 residents, or 127% more than the national average. So those destination travelers, keep your radar up for Alaska. And again, kind of talking about this and throwing some comedic curves at this list, but I do think that knowing what states tend to have more violent crimes is very, very useful information for us to know as travelers. Kind of gives us an idea of where to be careful and keep your guard up, and what other states will have a less chance of running into. And that was a big reason to look at just the violent crime statistics rather than all crime, which would include like things like property crimes, so like tagging, vehicle break-ins, not robberies, but like burglaries, I guess. For me, at least, I can field out those questions when I'm calling and talking to the housing people. Have you ever had a break-in on your street? How often? Is there any part of town, when you're doing the interview, is there any part of town that you would tell, your son, daughter, niece, nephew to stay away from? Those are good questions to ask on the interview. And I feel like we can avoid the property crime a lot easier than we can the violent crimes. And the extra credit point on this list was actually the real number 1, if you consider it a state, which it isn't, but they are trying to become a state, is District of Columbia. District of Columbia, their violent crime rate is 999.8 per 100,000 residents, so basically 1% chance of a violent crime, and is 170% more than the national average. Sometimes when you find like outliers and they're really small, like so comparing like District of Columbia to like California, obviously District of Columbia's population is much smaller. It's basically a city. But they tend to have this somewhere top 10 position for this state data. So I do think it's worth knowing that District of Columbia, pretty high chance that there's violent crime going on, or that you'll see or meet or know somebody that has it if they live there. And that is it for the top 10 top 10 safest and top 10 most dangerous or most violent states in the U.S. for travel healthcare professionals. Good information to know. Again, I'm a home health clinician, so this is really helpful information for me for cities that I'm going into, where I'm going into areas that I don't know. I don't know the roads. I don't know what areas to stay out of. I don't know what roads are, like if I miss a turn and all of a sudden I'm in a new area, or the town next to the city that I shouldn't be. This is really important information for me to know. Hospitals, you guys have systems, you guys have security, you guys have protocols. Our protocol in home health is to call either 911, depending on how severe it is, or the office and say some code words and get out of the scary house. But hospitals, maybe not as important, but if you're doing extracurricular activities, you're going to be walking home at night in the dark after your shift. Very, very much important to know what areas are safe. So all you nomads out there, stay safe, safe travels, and I'll see you at TravCon 2024.